Welcome to our TED Talk. My name is TJ Barzak.
And my name is Donovan Howell.
And today we're going to be presenting
The
end
End
of
of
Columbus Day. So first we're going to look at how are both people and processes glorified in American society. I put two examples up on our slides. First off, Christopher Columbus and fossil fuels. So how they kind of relate is that both were glorified earlier on in American society. First off, for Columbus's voyages to the Americas and fossil fuels sparking the Industrial Revolution. But in reality, nowadays in modern society, these two ideas aren't actually glorified anymore because of what Columbus did to the indigenous population and for fossil fuels now sparking climate change.
Now, although certain Americans believe in the celebration of Columbus Day due to its glorification, in actuality, Columbus Day should not be a holiday because of Columbus's mass genocide and his faulty leadership.
So should Christopher Columbus be glorified in American society? Well, Columbus Day really exists because of Columbus's glorification. If we look onto the painting on our left, which is The Landing of Columbus by Jean van der Linde in the year 1847, Columbus is depicted front and center with all the light fixated on him, showing off this fixation or this divine aspect to Columbus. And the painting isn't actually a direct representation of the glorification of Columbus. But if we're going to look into that negative side of the glorification, we can come over here to a book called Columbus: The Four Voyages by Lawrence Gergin. And in that book, he describes Columbus as making irreversible consequences to the island of Hispaniola, along with being the person who, quote unquote, begun imperialism, really just signifying that negative glorification onto Columbus. Now, if we're going to take both of these together, you see those different views of glorification, say positive with the painting by van der Linde, and the negative by the Book of Gergin. So you have this dichotomy between the two, along with the fact that, say, van der Linde would kind of depict Columbus as a divine figure, while Gergin would say that he's more of a person who's majorly flawed. So that positive glorification that I was speaking about before with van der Linde's painting, it can really be broken down so easily by all of Gergrin's factual evidence of Columbus's actions on the island of Hispaniola.
And paralleling the idea of Columbus's glorification, Columbus was known as a great leader, but in actuality his leadership was pretty faulty. So are Columbus's leadership skills something to model or disregard? Well, when we take a look at the first source, Columbus's Journal of the First Voyage to America, written in 1492 by Columbus, it depicts only positive events, and it is kind of skewed as it is written by Columbus to make him look like a better leader than he actually was, and quote unquote him setting forth numerous miracles. And as he states that he was setting forth numerous miracles, it kind of presents him as a great leader. Now, on the other hand, when we take a look at The Prayer of Columbus by Walt Whitman, written in 1874, he gives the behind the scenes into the poor leadership of Columbus and how Columbus neglected basic needs of the crew. And if we synthesize between the two sources, we can see that the prayer undermines the journal and how Walt Whitman describes or provides more truth to Columbus's leadership than his own biased journal.
So it's almost pretty interesting that the fiction piece actually does more work than his own journal. So coming to light, another aspect of Columbus on top of his faulty leadership would be the genocide he committed on the island of Hispaniola. If we're going to look at a first source called Examining the Reputation of Christopher Columbus, it is an essay written by Jack Weatherford in 1989. First Weatherford kind of brings into he starts a discussion about how Columbus could possibly have done a cultural encounter, but he immediately disregards that as what apologists would say, and that's not who Weatherford is. He likes to describe Columbus as not a sensitive genius at all, but someone who genocided a third of the indigenous population in only 4 years. He either exported them or killed them. And another great point that Weatherford makes at the very end of his essay is that there are two people that have namesake holidays in the United States of America. We have Martin Luther King for all of his great work in the civil rights movement, and then we also have Columbus, who genocided a third of a population. The relation just isn't necessarily there. So if we're going to look onto another source, which is an NPR podcast of Wilma Mankiller reflecting on Columbus Day. Wilma Mankiller is an indigenous person in the United States. So she was actually taught as a child the same way that, say, any other person we talk about Christopher Columbus, of all the wonderful things he did. But in her case, she didn't really recognize that it was a new world, because for indigenous people, it was just the original world. And also, she kind of reflects on Columbus's bad human attributes, such as conquest, exploitation, and in the end, murder. So if we're going to take these two sources together, you'll see that The insensitive nature of Columbus is just truly given light and truly shown, but also our insensitivity as the human race prolonged about Columbus through the idea of Columbus Day, which is still celebrated now. But kind of looking to the future a little bit, these two sources love to had almost the same note of instead celebrating the diversity of the Americas through discussion rather than giving a namesake holiday to Christopher Columbus. Now that we're going to take a look at some broad connections we've seen when compiling all of our sources together. Remember that positive glorification we talked about at the very beginning with that painting by Jean van der Linde? It's truly incorrect. You can see that from Columbus's faulty leadership, the genocide he committed, and really, in the end, we should just end the holiday of Columbus Day altogether.
Yeah, I mean, even after this talk, there will still be people who still want to celebrate Columbus, but it's just because they haven't looked past the fact of Columbus simply being glorified. Rather, Columbus Day shouldn't be celebrated because Columbus's faulty leadership and genocide of indigenous populations.
Yeah, and also really if we're going to take a look at the very beginning, if we're talking about that glorification back then with the fossil fuels in Columbus Day, they truly just aren't glorified anymore in modern day society. And honestly, maybe we should all just take a second to look back at the things still glorified in American society and really ask ourselves, should those things still be glorified? I don't know if it's true for everything. Well, thank you so much for listening to our TED Talk.